Responsibility accounting is a system in which managers are assigned and held accountable for certain costs, revenues, and/or assets. There are two important behavioral considerations in assigning responsibilities to managers. First, the responsible manager should be involved in developing the plan for the unit over which the manager has control. Current research indicates that people are more motivated to achieve a goal if they participate in setting it. Such participation assures that the goals will be reasonable and, perhaps more importantly, that they will be perceived to be reasonable by the managers. Second, a manager should be held accountable only for those costs, revenues, or assets over which the manager has substantial control. Some costs may be generated within a segment, but control over those costs lies outside that unit. For example, the manager of the Ventura Manufacturing Division may be held responsible for labor costs, but employee wages may be determined by a union scale controlled elsewhere. Admittedly, determining substantial control requires a judgment based on circumstances, but if all relevant factors are considered, careful and fair judgments can be made. If managers are to be held responsible for the costs incurred in their centers, they must have control over those costs, have information relevant to those costs, and have a system that focuses on and supports effective cost controls. Traditionally, companies have used a standard costing system that isolates differences between actual and standard or budgeted cost to determine whether costs are too high or too low, as well as whether costs are improving or getting worse. This is critical information if the organization expects to be competitive. In a standard cost management system, standard costs are compared to actual costs, and variances are computed. Service, merchandising, and manufacturing firms that use standard costing will design their accounting systems to incorporate standard costs and variances. This type of system, called a standard cost system, is a cost accumulation process based on costs that should be incurred rather than costs that were incurred. The steps in establishing and operating a standard cost system are as follows. First, standard costs must be developed. How much material should be used in a product? How much should that material cost? How much labor should be required to assemble the product? How much should that labor cost? Answers to these questions requires research and analysis, but that time is well worth the effort. At the end of this first step, you know how much a product or service should cost you. Second, then, is to collect the actual costs. The accounting system should be designed to gather actual cost information. You will be able to say how much material was used in a product, how much that material did cost, how much labor was used in assembling a product, and how much that labor did cost. The third step is then to compare the actual costs with what you expected those costs to be. The result will be what accountants call variances, the difference between what we expected and what was actually incurred. Analyzing these variances allows you to determine the cause of the variance. Did we use too much labor or material? Did we pay too much for our labor or material? This variance analysis is a crucial step in using standard costing techniques. Fourth and finally, we are now down to asking the important question: why? We know there is a variance, but now we need to investigate why. Was our standard unreasonable? Did we use labor inefficiently? We can now ask a host of why questions that will allow us to identify, is there a problem, and what can we do about it? These steps describe a typical standard cost system. You are likely to find an extensive standard cost system in most manufacturing firms, which usually have standard costs for direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. However, many service and merchandising firms also use standard cost systems to effectively manage critical costs in their organizations.